Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Today I'm going to talk about a very interesting point, which is a practical point, ventilator adjustment. How to adjust your ventilator. This is a very important part. When you look, when you put the patient first on the ventilator, you put him on a certain mode, whatever it is. I'm not going to discuss the mode simply, because here you set the mode is composed of this is control variable, phase variable, and this condition variable. So you set this value of the control variables. You set the flow, volume, time, pressure, FI2, and respiratory rate. Today I'm going to talk about the volume and the respiratory rate. The volume and respiratory rate, this means that you are defining and setting the minute volume. And this minute volume is important for the determinations of the partial pressure of carbon dioxide and the pH. So this is the minute volume, which is defined by the basal metabolic rate, and this minute volume defines, as I've mentioned before, the carbon dioxide and the pH. But when you put the patient on the ventilator, you put him on an empirical data, empirical value of the tidal volume and empirical value of the carbon dioxide of the respiratory rate, and accordingly you will get some sort of change in the pH of the carbon dioxide, and after that you have to adjust yourself to change the volume or to change the rate in order to reach to the target carbon dioxide, whether normal carbon dioxide or high carbon dioxide or low carbon dioxide according to the case of the patients. Now look at this is a formula. When you look at this is a partial pressure of carbon dioxide is determined by this is the carbon dioxide output multiplied the barometric pressure. This is the formula. This is the basal metabolic rate. And this is the alveolar minute volume. This is tidal volume minus dead space multiplied by the respiratory rate. This is very important to you. You should keep this in mind. We are going to use it later on. The tidal volume in the volume control is a preset. You have to set it. And when you set it, you should consider which patient you are dealing is. A patient with a normal lung, with a patient with COPD, or bronchial asthma, or ARDS. For this, in this case, you have to put the tidal volume. Normally, in the normal lung, we put about 10 ml per kilogram body weight, but in the others, whether COPD, bronchial asthma, or ARDS, you start with 4 to 5 ml per kilogram body weight at the tidal volume, and after that, adjust yourself. Here in the this is a pressure target. You set a pressure, and this is the tidal volume is defined, you had mentioned before, by the pressure. This is a driving pressure between the beep and the ceiling pressures, and in spare time, in addition, in case of resistance and compliance. Usually you set a pressure, but the pressure should not exceed the plateau pressure. This is the ceiling, this is a Pmax, which includes the pressure resistance. If you put it, the maximum pressure here should be about 10 minus it, this 10 minus these peak pressures will equal the plateau pressure. If the plateau pressure is 30, so this peak pressure should never exceed 40 centimeter water. So this is 40 will be the maximum. I'm talking about adult. 40 centimeter water should be the maximum. 40, this means that the plateau pressure will be 30. So start with the lower one and then exceed and then increase the pressure to increase the tidal volume, and this is in the way for the adjustment of the partial pressure of carbon dioxide or the pH. We are going to talk about it later. When you come to this is a pressure, this is a pressure control, the volume target. This is a preset tidal volume. So this is a tidal volume you set it. So in this case, you have a guarantee for the ceiling pressure, which should not exceed 40 centimeter water at the B max. The problem here comes from if the patient started to take his breaths now in an assisted controlled ventilations. If this is a volume and this is a volume, this is the pressure controlled and this is a volume controlled. Pressure controlled ventilations, this is if the patients start to take his breath and they became tachypneic. I'm going to discuss it later, but here the patient became tachypneic. This means that the time for this is inspiratory time, this is expiratory time, and this is expiratory pause. An increase in the respiratory rate will be on expense of this expiratory pause, to the degree that there will be encroachment on the expiratory time itself. So the time required for the exhalation, the tidal volume, will be insufficient. This means that there is some sort of dynamic hyperinflation and functional physical capacity will increase. And in this case, the pressure here this is the intrinsic V will be developed, and this pressure will increase, and the driving pressure will decrease, and accordingly the tidal volume developed will be smaller. So this patient will suffer hypoventilations. But on the other hand, when you look at this is a patient is volume controlled. Volume controlled. This is a preset tidal volume which will be delivered by force to the patient. Increasing the rate will be associated though there will be no time for the tidal volume to be exhaled totally, so part of it will remain, and this part will lead to increase in the functions of the capacity, and accordingly the elastic recoil will be high to get rid out of the tidal volume. This may be reached as a steady state, but sometimes it will not be reached if the pressure here increased to be more, the blood pressure to be more than 30 or 35. In this case, the patient had lung will rupture and lead to pneumothorax. So the problem here of tachypnea in a patient with volume control might develop pneumothorax, and after that tension pneumothorax, so should be considered. Pressure support also the tidal volume is defined by the ceiling pressures, and the inspirator time, which is defined by the expirator sensitivity, which is a piece or a percent of the peak inspirator flow, and this in phase of resistance and compliance. Also the same thing as I said, the ceiling pressure should never exceed 40. This means that the blood pressure will be 30. This is SIMV. It is a part of one mandatory and one pressure support. This is volume. So the volume I've mentioned, this is preset. The pressure support is defined by the data I've mentioned before. And this is a volume. This is a pressure support, and this is the pressure target volume controlled in the SIMV and Rager. This is a mandatory preset tidal volume, and this pressure support, the tidal volume will be will be defined by the pressure and the inspiratory time. Regarding CPAP, the tidal volume is defined. There is no driving pressure by the machine itself. All the workload is done by the patient, and the tidal volume is defined by the inspiratory drive of the patient. When you come to the BiPAP, if the patient is not taking his breath, this is the breath, the tidal volume will be defined by the high difference between the high CPAP and lower CPAP in phase of resistance and compliance, and inspiratory time. This will define the tidal volume, but this is another one, which is the pressure support. When you come to the airway pressure release ventilation, so the tidal volume will be defined by the driving pressure between the high CPAP and the low beep, and the inspiratory time in phase of resistance compliance, and this will define the tidal volume. When you come to the autoflow, this is this is the modification of the pressure controlled ventilations. But here, the tidal volume is very set, and there is an oscillations of increase or decrease of the pressure in order to get the target, in order to deliver the target preset tidal volume. So the tidal volume here is fixed, semi-fixed. What about the value of the tidal volume? I have mentioned before that the tidal volume here is the response. When you look at this is the peak pressure, this is the pressure resistance, and this is the pressure resistance, and this is the plateau pressure. The plateau pressure equals tidal volume over compliance. The compliance, this is pathology. So the tidal increase in the tidal volume will be associated with increase in the plateau pressure. Decrease in the tidal volume will be associated with decrease in the plateau pressure. So we have to take care of this tidal volume I mentioned before. The tidal volume, increase in tidal volume will be associated with increase in the blood pressure, which might lead to rupture if it is more than 35 centimeter water. If you are using the pressure controlled ventilation, this is normal. This is the inspiratory resistance and the flow. This depends on the flow and inspiratory resistance, usually about 10 centimeter water. You subtract 10 centimeter water, or you add 10 centimeter water more than 30, this means than 40, you should never exceed 40 centimeter water in pressure controlled ventilation in order to avoid the rupture of these alveoli. Another important point when you come, usually the tidal volume, we usually say this is in COPD, bronchial asthma, and ARDS, you have to give, to start with 4 centimeter water, 4 ml per kilogram body weight. This is for the tidal volume, because the dead space equals about 2.2 or 2 ml per kilogram body weight, and if you, the remaining two will be, this will be the tidal volume. Tidal volume in this case, if it is 2 ml per kilogram body weight, yeah, the rate in this case will be the maximum, which about 30 breaths per minute. in order to deliver the alveolar minute volume, which is about 4 liters. So this is the minimal part, or we should not be lower than that. Otherwise, the patients will enter into hypoventilation. You start with this in bronchial asthma, COPD, and ARDS, and increase. Keeping in mind the plateau pressures, but in the normal lung, I should think it's better to go to start with a larger one, like 10 ml per kilogram body weight. So this is the volume, and this is the precautions for the determinations of the tidal volume. When you come to the second part, which is the respiratory rate, the respiratory rate plus the tidal volume, the two determine the minute volume, which is responsible, as I mentioned before, to adjust carbon dioxide and pH. And this is the net results of the basal metabolic rate or the metabolic state of the patient. So you should keep in mind. So the respiratory rate, they have a minimum, this means the respiratory failure, or a maximum, which should not be exceeded. Otherwise, the patient will enter into what we call hyperdynamic inflations, and the functional reserve capacity will increase, and this will add to hypoventilation if the patient is breathing spontaneously, or it may lead to hypoventilation if the patient is on pressure controlled, or lead to rupture of the lung and pneumothorax and tension pneumothorax if the patient is on volume control. So this should be kept in mind. A very important point for the respiratory rate is case of COPD and bronchial asthma, and this should be considered. The respiratory rate in SIMV is total. This is a mandatory plus the respiratory spontaneous intubation. Uh, the Before we go into the respiratory rate, we have to take care. This is what we call the duty cycle. Duty cycle. This is inspiratory time, and this is expiratory time, and this is expiratory pause. The increase in the respiratory time will, and expiratory rate will be on the expense of this expiratory pause. This should be kept in mind. Before we talk about the respiratory rate, we have to consider what we call expiratory time constant. This is the time required for the exhalations of about 60% of the tidal volume, which this depends on the elastic recoil of the lung itself against the resistance. And this is a time constant, so equals the compliance multiplied by the resistance. This will give you milliseconds. So this is the expiratory time constant. About 60%, 63% of the tidal volume will be exhaled. This is in 1 second, or the first one, this is in 1 second. This is a time constant, and this is the 63%. 63% of the tidal volume. This is a one-time constant. This is two-time constant. This is three-time constant. Also, one-time constant means that the exhalation of about 60% of the tidal volume. Usually, we multiply it. We take a three-time constant. This is if the patient is having the normal lung, might have, this is the compliance is about 50, and this expiratory resistance about 6. This means that the one time constant will be 300 milliseconds. Three-time constant will be 900 milliseconds, so about 1 second. So this means that the exhalations, the normal persons the exhalation, the tidal volume will consume 1 second. Let us see what will happen if there is some sort of respiratory rate. If the respiratory rate is about 10 breaths per minute, so the duty cycle in this will be 60 seconds over 1 over 10 will give you 6 seconds. So 1 second for inspiration and 1 second for expirations, and the remaining 4 seconds will be for the as expiratory pause. What will happen if increase the respiratory rate from 10 to 20? See, this is so the duty cycle will be 3 seconds and 1 second for inspiration, another for expiration, and the third second for expiratory pause. So and have ample time for another increase in the rate. What will happen if we increase the rate instead of being 20 to 30? So this is a 30. So the duty cycle will be 2 seconds, one for inspirations and one for expirations, and no room for the expiratory pause. So there's no expiratory pause. This is the inspiration, expiration, inspiration, expiration, no expiratory pause. What will happen if I increase the rate from 30 to say 40? So to say from 30 to 40, so the duty cycle will be 1.5 seconds. 1 second, this is an obligatory for inspiration, and the remaining 0.5 seconds will be for exhalation. So no, I need 1 second for exhalation. This is the normal for the normal compliance and resistance. It needs 1 second. So this means that half or part of the tidal volume will be retained within the lung, and this is a very important point. So this means that the functional capacity will not be regained to the at the end of expiration. So that will be the functional residual capacity will increase. So the increase in functional residual capacity due to accumulations of part of the tidal volume which is not exhaled. This means that leads to hyperinflation of the lung. In normal person, this means that the tidal volume of the patients will decrease because of the increase in the functional cellular capacity, and the patient become hypoventilated. This is what we call usually, this is a shallow rapid breathing. Shallow rapid breathing is a hypoventilating breathing. But if the patient on, as I've mentioned before, is on ventilator, if he's on pressure control, this means the functional cellular capacity will increase. So this means there is an intrinsic PEEP. The driving pressures will decrease, the ceiling pressure is maximum, and the driving pressure will decrease because this is the difference between the ceiling pressure and respiratory and the increase in the PEEP due to the presence of intrinsic PEEP. This leads to decrease in the driving pressure, and so the tidal volume will decrease. So the patient will enter into hypoventilations. But on the contrary, in the volume controlled ventilations know that the preset tidal volume will be delivered. No questions about the level of this tidal volume. So the tidal volume will be delivered with increase in the PEEP, with concomitant increase in the plateau pressures, and this will lead to rupture of the patient's pneumothorax and tension pneumothorax. This should be considered. Another important point for this expiratory rate with the expiratory resistance, because we are talking about expiratory time constant. Expiratory resistance, as I've mentioned before, normal is about 6. If this is 6, this means the expiratory time constant, 3 expiratory time constants will need about 1 second. If the patient is respiratory rate is 20, this means that the cycle will be 3, 1 for inspiration, 1 for expirations, and another one as expiratory pause. The same thing will be, for this is the respiratory rate, but will increase the resistance. And instead of being 6, it is now 12. 12. The respiratory rate is 20, so the cycle is the same as 3. But here the resistance, this is the time constant, and the time constant increase, and the total time constant with 3 time constant for the exhalation of this tidal volume will need about 1.8 seconds. So we have 1 second for inspirations and 1.8 seconds for the expirations, and so what is remaining from the 3 seconds is 0.2 seconds as expiratory pause. What will happen if there is some sort of increase in the expiratory resistance? Instead of being at 12, it became 18. So this is another problem. The problem here that the time constant, 3 time constant required for the exhalation of this time of this tidal volume is about 2.7, say 3 seconds. 3 seconds, and here the same rate is 20. The duty cycle is 3. If we take inspirations, this is we need 3 seconds for exhalations, but the cycle here is the expiration, the total expiratory time with the time or pause, all of it is about 2 seconds. So I need another more 1 second for the expiration. So this leads to accumulations of a part of the tidal volume, and this is what we call dynamic hyperinflations, and the same problem will happen. So this is that's why when you fight the patients of COPD or bronchial asthma, you have to measure this expiratory time constant. If I measure this expiratory time constant for these patients, and this is the expiratory time constant multiplied by 3, and this is the time for the exhalation. Look, this is the expiratory time. This is expiratory time. Say it is 3 seconds. 3 seconds plus the inspiratory. So the duty cycle in this patient with this spasm will be 4 seconds. So this is the duty cycle. So this is 1 minute, 60 seconds over 4. This means that the time, the respiratory time of this patient should be about 15 or 16 breaths per minute, and not 20, in order to avoid this dynamic hyperinflation. That's why a patient with COPD or bronchial asthma, it's mandatory to understand or estimate what is the maximum respiratory rate tolerated by these patients in this state of bronchial spasm. In this case, you will define how much will be the expiratory time In addition to the inspirator time, this is the duty cycle, and the duty cycle is 1 plus 3 to 4, 60 over 4, this means for 15. In this case, you should be cautious about this patient that the respiratory rate should not exceed 15. This is the repetition of I have mentioned before. What is the expected respiratory rate? I should measure the duty cycle for these patients, expiratory time constant multiplied by 3 and plus the inspiratory time. This will give you the total duty cycle. 60 over this duty cycle will give you the respiratory rate for this patient expected or anticipated, in order to avoid the problem of dynamic hyperinflation and hypoventilation. So this is bilateral rate in the controlled mandatory ventilation volume target, you set it, and the controlled pressure target, you set it, but in the and also in the controlled pressure target volume control, you set it. This is you put the respiratory rate according to what you see. And but here the same problem I have mentioned before. This is the respiratory rate for the pressure, also for the volume. If the patient started to take his breath, and this is assisted control, take care. The patient with pressure control will develop hypoventilation if it became tachypnic, and this patient with volume control will develop the volutrauma pneumothorax or tension pneumothorax if it became tachypnic. Pressure support the respiratory rate is that of the patient, and take care of dynamic hyperinflation of the patients with hypoventilations. Pressure, the SIMV, this is a pressure, the respiratory rate will be the two together. This is a mandatory plus the spontaneous of the patient. Should take care of it. Whether this is volume or pressure, the same thing. This is the same also for the Draeger, which is the SIMV. This is a mandatory. In addition to this, the spontaneous, this is the total respiratory rate for the patient. Regarding the CPAP, the respiratory rate is that of the patient, so there is no aid by the ventilator. When it comes to the VABAB, if the patient is mandatory, the respiratory rate will be, this is just a high time plus the low time over 60 over this, this is the duty cycle will give you the respiratory rate. And if the patient is having some another pressures above this, is so the respiratory rate will increase. When you come to the respiratory rate, here is defined, but this is the time, this is the high CPAP, this is low beep, this is time. If this is 4 plus 1, this is 5, so this means that the respiratory rate will be 12. That's it. We measure now, we come to the very important point. You set the tidal volume with its precautions and the respiratory rate with its precaution in order to reach to a certain partial pressure of carbon dioxide uh, uh, or or in order to reach to a certain pH. In you adjust the tidal volume and respiratory rate according to the state of the patient. Say if the patient is having severe metabolic acidosis. In this case, your target point is not carbon dioxide. I am going to wash out carbon dioxide in order to reach with the pH close to the normal. So in this case, you are going to increase the rate or to increase the tidal volume or the two together in order to reach to the target. Keeping in mind the precautions for the tidal volume and respiratory rate. So in this case, the target point in this case is to wash out carbon dioxide to reach to the pH close to the normal. If the patient is hyperventilating with traumatic brain injury and he is making wash out of carbon dioxide, and this wash out of carbon dioxide will be associated with severe cerebral vasospasm, and the patient will harm himself or will kill himself. In this case, you have to sedate the patient or you give the patient much relaxant and put him on a ventilator, and you adjust the ventilator to keep the partial pressure of carbon dioxide close to 35 centimeter water. So this is adjustment of the patient. A patient with COPD, patient with acute on top of chronic exacerbation of COPD, the patient retained more carbon dioxide and the came with the pH is low pH. In this case, you have to adjust the pH of the patient. You wash out the added carbon dioxide in order to go back with the pH to close to 3.7, 3.5. So 7.35. So this is a very important point. So we are adjusting the pH. You are not you are washing the added not the target, not the target to go with the carbon dioxide to the normal. No, I'm going to go back with the carbon dioxide to go into the previous state, or to adjust the pH close to 7.35. Normal lung for sure. This is normal carbon dioxide. ARDS. ARDS is another problem. The patient is having baby lung and the minute volume is very small, and therefore sometimes it is difficult for you to come with the partial pressure close to the normal. And in this case, you are giving the maximum tolerated rate according to the expected time constant, and the maximum tidal volume according to the plateau pressure should not exceed 30. And in this case, this is the maximum, and that's the maximum, and this minute volume is not sufficient to wash out of carbon dioxide. You are allowed to enter into the formula of permissive hypercapnia. So this is the adjustment of carbon dioxide. Another important point, sometimes how to adjust the carbon dioxide. This is on the ventilator. You come to this formula: partial pressure of carbon dioxide equals this carbon dioxide output multiplied by the barometric pressure over the alveolar minute tidal volume minus the space to the respiratory multiplied by the respiratory rate. When you look at this, this is a formula. If you want to adjust the partial pressure of carbon dioxide of a patient, the patient say this is a carbon dioxide, his carbon dioxide is 60 and you want to come down with 40. So this is a measured carbon dioxide. Measured carbon dioxide will be 60 for this patient. And what is the tidal volume on the ventilator and respiratory rate on the ventilator? And then what's required? You want to come down from 60 to 40. This will be 40, and then you are allowed to change either the tidal volume or respiratory rate. We say we'll fix the respiratory rate, and the tidal volume will come from this formula. So this tidal volume will increase. Instead of being a number, say 500, it will be 600, something like that. So this is a measured carbon dioxide. The measure the actual tidal volume, the actual respiratory rate. This is required. You want to change the carbon dioxide from 60 to 40, or the carbon dioxide of this patient is making wash out of carbon dioxide is 30, and you want to come back with 35. So in this case, it will be 35. To change one of these, or the two together as you like. This is a respiratory rate, and this is the tidal volume. Regarding the COPD, this is another formula. COPD, if you want to change, this is a patient came with acute exacerbations of chronic respiratory failure. So this is a patient, he added carbon dioxide in addition to the high previous carbon dioxide. How can you adjust this patient? My target is to retain this patient with to the previous batch of carbon dioxide. This means that to retain the pH of acidosis to the previous close to the normal, which is 7.35. This is usually done by one of these three forms. What we call corrected bicarbonate is, I've mentioned it in the ABG interpretation. So this is a formula which gives you the previous state of bicarbonate. And for the previous state of bicarbonate, this is from the normal, compare it to the normal, and this is a large number. This is the added bicarbonate due to the carbon dioxide retentions, and we have the formula that carbon dioxide retentions in COPD patients will be associated with the retention of bicarbonate 0.35. And in this case, you can calculate how much is the expected carbon dioxide. Another formula, this is the bicarbonate minus 3. This is if just a simple acute exacerbations without any metabolic problem. This means that the kidney will compensate by adding 3 to 4 ml equivalent per liter of bicarbonate. So if you subtract this 3 or 4 ml, this gives you that this is the previous state of bicarbonate. Previous bicarbonate, how far from 24? This is a normal. This means that, and come to the formula, one increase in the partial pressure of carbon dioxide 1 millimeter mercury will be associated with increase in the bicarbonate 0.35 milli equivalent bicarbonate, so you can know the previous state. The last one, which is this is if you this is the patient came with a pH, and this is the pH you wanted to change this pH. This is pH say 7.2, and you want to go with this pH 7.35. So this is the target pH 7.35, and this is the present pH 7.2. The difference will be 0.15. This is you know that the formula, the delta change of carbon dioxide, 10 millimeter change of carbon dioxide will be associated with the change in the pH 0.08. So this is divided by 0.08 and multiplied by 10. This will give you the partial pressure of carbon dioxide to be washed out. So these are the three ways in order to correct and make some sort of restoration of the patient or adjustment of the patients on the ventilation. On the ventilator, I think these points should be considered regarding the volume, respiratory rate, and how to adjust on and its precautions and how to adjust it on the ventilator. Thank you.